Hi, welcome to Spotlight on the Arts. I'm your host for today, Karen Stevens, and today we'll be discussing a success story. But first, I'd like to welcome our panel, Miss Iris Acker, actress and producer of Spotlight on the Arts, Mr. Bill Hirschman, journalist and South Florida theater critic, and sitting in for our usual panelist, Mr. Michael McKeever, who couldn't be here today, is his understudy, Mr. Michael Leeds, a director, playwright, and teacher. But we'd like to welcome our very special guest, and will tell us about a two-tiered success story, the artistic director of the Maltz Jupiter Theatre, Mr. Andrew Kato. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Good to be here, as always.
It is very good to have you and very good to see you again. So let's talk about this success story. And we have a two-tiered success story to talk about, your own and that of the Maltz Jupiter Theatre. And you've come in and taken what was once an institution, the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theater, and turned it around and made it a phenomenal success. And along with it, you've risen to some heights yourself. So you can start with either the theater or yourself, but tell us about that path to success that you've taken.
Wow. Well, thank you for the compliment, first of all. But really, I would prefer to talk about the theater because I'm so proud of everything that we've been able to achieve there. And really, I think the underlying success is due to a few things. First of all, an amazing staff we've assembled over the past years. People who are very passionate about the goals that we've set. They're very entrepreneurial in their spirit and how they approach the work. An incredible board who, especially in the early years, Milton and Tamar Maltz, and then really a large group of people who just wanted to make sure that Jupiter and the surrounding areas, Palm Beach County, was not a cultural wasteland, and they put their money where their mouth was, and they renovated what used to be the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theatre and went through a whole series of other incarnations before it fell into complete disrepair. And I actually came into the story about 2 years into a major renovation that was done in 2004. And although the facilities were great, I think the one major thing that was missing from the theater was consistent quality. And I was asked many years earlier by Milton and Tamar to meet them in New York. They had heard that I grew up in the area and that I was producing in New York. And they said, we're not offering you anything, but would you come and meet with us? And so we had a lovely meeting. And 2 years later, I received a phone call saying, would you come down to see the theater and consider possibly joining us down here? And to be honest with you, and I've told this story before, it wasn't really in my cards at that time. I was very happy in New York, and it wasn't something, the idea of going home again was not really something that you think about doing. And I flew down, and saw my mom, who still lives in Tequesta, and with my partner, Jay, and we saw the theater, and I was so impressed with the work that they had done, and it seemed like a diamond in the rough. And I just turned 40, and I thought, this is probably as good an offer being for a 40-year-old that you're going to get. And I spoke to my partner and said, do you want to go have an adventure? And so we...
One way to put it.
Yeah, right. So we packed up our New York apartment into a U-Haul, and like the Beverly Hillbillies, kind of came down to Florida and started on the adventure. And I really didn't realize how much trouble the theater was in. And when I say trouble, there was a lot of really good energy and really people, a lot of good feelings and good intentions, that's it, thank you. Got stuck there. But it just needed someone to come in. I'll tell a real brief story.
With a vision.
Yeah, with a vision,
yes.
and some knowledge of the industry and how to keep it together. A really funny story was when I started, the number one thing I asked for was the production calendar. and they gave it to me, and it had the opening date and the closing date. That was it. That's all they had. No load-in schedule. And so I was like, oh, well, we have to call a production meeting really quick. And Sima Bressler, who's still with the theater, she does our props. I said, okay, everyone, this Thursday at noon, we're going to have a production meeting. And we came together, and after she said, Andrew, this is a really good idea that you had to bring us all together to talk about the show. And I said, oh, Sim, I said, this is the way it's done. I thank you for, for the compliment. But and then it was really, again, about, a lot of people talk about the resources of the Maltz Jupiter Theatre. And when we came in, when I came in, we had nothing. I often refer to the process as putting the place together with Scotch tape and paper clips, because we were in a position of having to make the theater substantial and to put on a good production with only really money that the board was contributing and a little bit of fundraising that was happening. And frankly, Milton and Tamar Maltz, in my first season, they gave a staggering $1 million in my first year. And over the years, we've paid that down. Now, again, you all know from being in this industry that if you don't have that kind of support, then it's nearly impossible to make that happen. So I think everyone is very indebted to them for that commitment early on. But to be sustainable, you can't just lean on two people and a board. So the goals then from there were to really be strategic in the kinds of decisions that we were making. The number one decision was to get our audiences back. So we artificially lowered the prices very low. Because people were like, oh, I've been there and it wasn't a great experience. But with the money that the Maltzes were giving us and the money that we were getting from our limited ticket sales, we could only do small shows. So we were doing, I inherited Plaid Tidings and Barefoot in the Park, which are all lovely shows. But they certainly weren't on the scale that we were doing now. But that had to be a thing that we evolved to every year to take steps. And again, my concern was not that everyone was going to love everything, but the quality had to be consistent, and the production values, everything had to be great. So that was the number one objective. And because of that, and then another really quick story, because it was amusing. I came in a week into the last hurricane that hit us, and we loaded our set in with a single generator light bulb, one light bulb. It was a country musical. Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it. But Hap gave it a D. This was my very first. I inherited the season. Yes. And we loaded the show in. They had to rehearse in another Florida town. It was really quite a nightmare. And when I showed up, there was no furniture in the lobby, and it looked like the rec hall of a retirement home. It was like they had a box and posters stapled on the windows. And so I was like, first thing we have to do is create a sense of permanence, a sense of like we're going to be here for a while. You have to communicate all of those important things. So that was the beginning.
Well, I think that's what fascinates people so much about the Maltz and its success is because we know where you started from. And it's a fascinating story. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job. But you're known for your quality of work.
And to go the next step, I mean, what some people who have not been to your theater don't realize is that you do mainstream theater, but you do it with a very high level of quality and an amazing production values. I think we've talked before, some of your budgets are between $400,000 and $500,000.
Now.
And that the general, but that there is also a certain reliability. There's a brand there of a certain reliable level of quality that you hit 98% of the time, and that people know that they may like the show, they may not like the show, but they know they're not going to you're not going to fall below a certain level of quality. Right. And I think that, because you've talked about how you have a much higher subscription level, percentage subscription level than many other theaters have.
Right. In a non-urban area too. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt. I mean, I think it's would be very difficult to stand here or sit here and say that we're not a populist theater at this point. But to be honest with you, you have to create a foundation by which to build upon. And it's not to say, though, that as we've evolved, that the programming hasn't changed. I mean, I think if you look back, we were doing a review every year. That's been replaced now with a play, and now the plays are being replaced with hopefully a little more stretch in them, like Other Desert Cities. And Red and Amadeus. They're still popular titles, but that's just part of the growth. I mean, we're 9 years old. We're a baby, really, in terms of theater companies are concerned.
Yeah. But one of the things that you do is that while you do mainstream titles, and you have an audience that's expecting to see a certain kind of product, you also have directors who come in and to some degree give it as fresh a spin as possible, remembering very well the Hello Dolly that you did.
Right, with Marcia Milgram Dodge.
With Marcia Milgram Dodge as director and Vicki Lewis as the star. And yes, it was Hello Dolly, and the material was the same, but it was the most fresh approach to it.
Well, that's interesting you're saying that, because the approaches are different. So that you've seen Dolly before, you saw that Dolly, now you see the Maltz's Dolly. And I always like to ask all my guests, and I know the answer to this, is what got you where you are today, and where did you have your training? Didn't you have your training at the Burt Reynolds Theatre?
Yes, I mean, that is, I think really theater people get their training wherever you can find it, right? And for me, I was a very fair-skinned, pale boy in a beach resort area who liked theater, and I was very happy to hide and learn within the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theater, and to the point where I skipped classes to go to an orchestra Sitzprobe, and I volunteered when there was an apprentice program. I was not an apprentice, but I volunteered there to do changeovers, so I learned what a production schedule was. I learned, that was my early training, and at the end of my 8 years there, through high school and college, where I put myself through college business at FAU, but I graduated from Florida State University in theater, I put myself completely through college working at the Burt Reynolds Dinner Theater, waiting tables.
On-the-job training.
That's right. But meanwhile, the master classes that I had privy to, I mean, the apprentices were going into other rooms, but I could sit and listen and
Charles Nelson
watch.
Riley.
It's amazing.
Dr. Louise.
Yeah, they're
I
all
used to attend them as well whenever I worked there.
Yeah, and so just being in the environment of theater people it was wonderful. And so I went off to college. I thought that I knew everything that you needed to know about theater, and I actually found my theater classes much more difficult than my business classes, because as theater people, it's original thought. You're coming up with your approach to something versus an answer. And so I left here and went directly to Portland Stage Company, worked for Richard Hamburger, the artistic director there at a Lort C Theater, but that's what he was doing. He was doing Shakespeare and classics. And so I immersed myself in that world, did 2 years of that, and then Portland was great, but my goal always was to be a commercial producer in New York. So I put my resume out to everyone. I think I met with everyone there, and I luckily received an offer from Margot Lyon, who is the lead producer of a new musical at that time being launched called Jelly's Last Jam, directed by a newcomer, George C. Wolfe. and I had the privilege of then learning, I really consider it my master's degree was Broadway, because I would go to Sereno Coyne and learn from Rick Ellis, who now has written Jersey Boys, but he was the ad executive there at that time, and Nancy Coyne. Michael David from Dodger Productions. Michael was like my hero. He would walk into the room and run a meeting, and that was, you can't learn on the business side from anyone greater. And in fact, when I go back and do the Tony Awards, I see Michael, and you always assume that people forget you, right, when you go away. But I just on Matilda, I went up to him and I was like, I just hope you know what you did for me, because I now have the privilege at the Maltz Jupiter Theatre to apply everything that I learned on Broadway. And in many ways, my talents are better served at a regional theater than they are on Broadway, because Broadway has changed a lot. And I feel that the desire to have a producerial talent is not as honored as it used to be. I think that there are general managers who are really doing that job, and because of the corporatization of Broadway, you all know how many Broadway producers you have above the title.
Yeah, right.
So it was frustrating for me to be working in an industry on Broadway, and so to have the invitation then to come back to Jupiter and be able to have that ability to shape an organization was very thrilling for me. It was really great.
Well, we know each other from way back
That's
in
right,
those
I
days. So, I've told you this before, how proud I am of you and what you managed to do. And I think it's great. So has the theater's progression kind of adhered to your vision along the way? Is it?
Yeah, and I want to be really clear not to make this just about me, because because the theater is a collection of a group of wonderful constituents, including our audience. I mean, the fact that people and our donors, people show up to buy tickets, that's huge.
Have you ever put out, what would you like us to play?
Sure.
Their opinion?
Absolutely.
You have?
Yeah, and I've done it, again, kind of going back to my marketing days. I've done it in ways that are surprising. Like I'll do a survey, but I'll ask the question, like, rate this from 1 to 10, and I'll give them a series of titles. And then I'll ask the question in a different way, and I'll color code the pages, because I just want to see, like, if you ask it in a different way, will they, am I slanting my own personal views into it?
And see, that's very, you've alluded to this like 3 or 4 times, that a lot of people don't understand. A lot of artistic directors and producers of regional theaters, particularly down here, are at heart directors and playwrights and actors and people who come from that side. And while you do as well, you have a very strong business background. And one of the things I want you to talk about is, without saying this in a derogatory way, the Maltz Jupiter Theatre is a very corporate kind of place. You have a lot of marketing, and it's a lot of strategic planning going out years, a lot of how can we maximize the use of our resources, again, almost in a corporate sense. You're very computerized, you do lots of planning. Talk a little about what you think you're doing along those lines.
Right, I think it boils down to the core word is strategic planning. And I think that we've been very good about figuring out what we need to maximize those dollars. For example, we were hitting 90 to 100% capacity for several years, and we knew that in order to have less dependence on donors, we should increase our earned ticket revenue. So the opportunity arose to draw up plans to add 62 new seats. And you think, 62 new seats, well, that's not very many. But 62 new seats on a VIP level times 7,000 seats over the course of a season results into $300,000 or $400,000. That's as competitive as an endowment, which we also is another program that we had the fortune to have a 3-to-1 match. Because if you have a bad year, and again, this is all, if you see the direction I'm going with this is all foundation building, because then after a while you can add a second space, you can do new work, you can support scholarships for kids, you can have the solid foundation to then build out and take risks from there. And it has been very frustrating over the years for people to have a kind of pejorative view of the theater as being too commercial or populist, but that's by intention. I feel that it's my responsibility to create a solid foundation for the organization, and then we can go out and start to take risks. Not too many, because I feel like one a year you can.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a gamble.
It's a bit of a gamble. But where we can be more ambitious, though, is in a second space. And that is the plan as we move forward to do that. I also want to make use of my Broadway connections, and we're also contemplating building the stage so that it's pre-tour or Broadway, that we could launch that. Again, another tremendous source of revenue for the theater. But I don't think that we have to be just artists or just business people. I think there is a real healthy mix. And I think that that's the goal as a producer. Know your audience, understand what they want, and then grow them, move them into a direction that you want, and be strategic about it. Educate them. I mean, that's definitely part of our mission, is to educate, entertain, and inspire our community. And I've said this in the past too, the key words in this is not educate, entertain, and inspire. The key words are our community. You know, it's ours. It's the people who live in our,
that's good.
Right, in our area. And you know, but again, if you look at my history, you know, Jelly's Last Gem, Angels in America, Cryptogram by David Mamet, those were the plays that I love and that I enjoyed working on. But when you're charged with an organization and being responsible for all the people who have jobs there, you can't be selfish. You can't say, I'm just going to do what I want to do. You have to do what's best for the baby. You know, the Maltz Jupiter Theatre is our baby, our collective baby, and we have a responsibility to make sure that it's brought up right. And so that's been job one for me.
And that's how you plan your seasons, obviously.
Yeah,
with that in mind.
That actually has its own separate art, and what Bill was referring to. Like, pretty much you can point to anything, and I could walk you through how we make our decisions. But season planning actually has a lot to do with seasonality. We monitor when our audience comes and goes. Like, our season always typically ends the Sunday before Easter and Passover, because we tested it, and we have a mass exodus, like a lot of theaters. People leave for the holidays, believe it or not. You would think that they would be here for Christmas, but they don't. They go back up north or away, or they're focused on the holidays. So we do the first 2 weeks in December. But then other factors are like housing. If you notice, we always do the small play in between the two large musicals that has everything to do with making sure that we house people. And it's not just housing New Yorkers. Anyone in a Lort B contract, anyone outside of 50 miles, you are required by the union to house them. So if we hire Todd Allen Durkin, we house him, you know, or
and a car.
That's right, and give him a car. That's right.
Right.
So so it is everything is a calculation and part of the plan, and that's fun though, because really, isn't it constraints even as an artist that kind of makes things great? Like, if you say, all right, we're going to put on a play, and you've got 5 chairs and 3 flashlights. Now tell the story. You know, we would do it. We could figure that out.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
You know,
Michael, as a director, you only direct plays that you want to direct. Am I correct? You freelance, and would you actually turn down a play at the Maltz Jupiter Theatre because you would say it's not my bag, or something?
There's a lot of decisions that go into, I think, picking, you know, the jobs you want to do, and one of them is the environment. And what Andrew has done with the Maltz, because I know many of the people who work there, is, you know, you're going to be in a place that's going to nurture you and that's going to give you a really strong production team, which a lot of theaters down here don't necessarily do. I mean, as obvious as production meetings are, there are still theaters down here, well-known theaters, that just don't have time for production meetings. And so you're fighting uphill. So, I mean, I think that's one of the things that is a tribute to Andrew and to everybody involved, that I can see that it makes a home where if you're a guest in a home that you know is providing you with the best. And that's
what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing.
yeah.
Any failure so far? You made a big mistake?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. Again, I think you learn probably more from your failures than your successes.
Thank you.
They
And-
come hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah,
Success
absolutely.
and failure.
One of them that I talk, and it has nothing to do with the actual product itself, but tintypes was a decision. I thought I was guessing that our audience would love an old-fashioned review, Your Grand Old Flag,
I
Oh
would too,
Susanna,
absolutely.
and they hated it. I mean, let me just put it, they hated it. They didn't come. They didn't buy tickets. The people who did, I won't even say.
And your biggest success. Your biggest success.
But it's very painful when you go through that process. And
What did you learn from it?
what I learned from it actually is that it was too conceptual. Our audiences if they get confused, like with our production of Amadeus, where there was a unit set and it was beautifully rendered, but when they don't, they can't follow the story, they disengage, and I think with tintypes, they didn't know what it was.
When times have left you in the red.
That happens quite a bit, actually. with tintypes,
I do want to say to you though that I want to thank you for hiring me, because I've been trying to get into that theater for years and years and years, and I did work for you last season in Doubt, and it was a phenomenal experience. You treat your
That's good
actors
from an
with the
actress's point.
utmost professionalism, and I mean, I can't wait to come back.
Well, you know you will.
And,
We had a great time.
and I want to congratulate you on everything, and thank you for being here today, and thank you for being here, and thank our panel, Iris, Michael, and Bill, for joining us. Please go to the theater. If you'd like to know what's playing in South Florida Theater, visit floridatheateronstage.com. There's a lot going on in our area, and there are a lot of talented people down here. Thank you for being here with us today, and join us next week with Spotlight on the Arts.